Miami Airport always looks like an anthill in December. Streams of people are rushing with gifts, suitcases, and hopes. Some are flying to their family, others are going on a long-awaited vacation. The hum of voices in different languages can be heard in the waiting room, the smell of coffee mixes with the smell of aviation fuel, and behind the large panoramic windows, an endless string of runway lights shines like a garland on a Christmas tree. In the midst of this traffic celebration, a flight to Colombia is preparing to take off. The Boeing 757, with its neat white and blue plumage and the American Airlines logo on its tail, stands at the gate like a huge bird gathering strength for a night flight. 163 people are expected to gather on board: businessmen, tourists, families with children. For many, this is a homecoming. For others, it is a way to relax in warmer climes. They all think about the upcoming holidays, about meeting their loved ones, and about the smiles and gifts ahead. But along with the expectation of the holiday, there is another emotion, a slight irritation. The flight was delayed, first because of the waiting for transit passengers and cargo, then because of the heavy traffic in the lanes of Miami. The minutes drag by slowly, and for some it becomes a reason to abandon the flight. Things are more important. Those who remain are unlikely to suspect how fateful this decision will be. The usual atmosphere already reigns inside the cabin. Flight attendants check belts and luggage racks. Someone is in a hurry to send the latest messages, and someone closes their eyes, dreaming of escaping from the noisy airport into the silence of the night sky faster. It's warm outside, humid Atlantic air, and the flight is only 3 hours and 12 minutes away. It would seem a trifle, and it is here that a contrast arises that is invisible to passengers. From the outside, there is a sense of celebration and tranquility, while in the sky, where this plane is about to ascend, a maze of mistakes, tension, and fatal coincidences is already hidden. So far, everything looks casual, almost perfect. But very soon, the illusion will shatter like glass broken in the dark. In the parking lot at the gate, the plane is ready to take off. The Boeing 757-223 is a reliable aircraft, known in the world of civil aviation as one of the most popular medium-haul airliners of its time. Twin-engine, with wings of modified aerodynamics and modern navigation systems, it is able to easily cover the distance between Miami and Cali. This is the route he's going to take today. 2 experienced pilots are preparing for work in the cockpit. The commander is Nicholas Fury, 57 years old. His experience in aviation is huge. He has tens of thousands of flight hours, and his colleagues call him a pedant in the good sense of the word. Next to him is co-pilot Donald Williams, 39, a representative of a new generation of pilots who masterfully controls the aircraft's complex electronic systems. Together, they must guide the liner through the Andes Mountains to the valley where the city of Cali is located. There are 155 passengers in the cabin. Someone is holding Spanish newspapers, someone is holding American magazines, and children are stealthily looking out the windows, waiting for takeoff. The atmosphere is calm, familiar for an evening flight. People smile politely at each other. The flight attendants greet everyone at the entrance. But it is at such moments that the illusion of safety is born. It seems that nothing can go wrong. In fact, this flight was already different from the ideal schedule. In the afternoon, the plane arrived from Ecuador and passed all the necessary checks. There were no technical comments. But the crew change and the delay on the ground have already begun to shift the timing. By 1835, when the dispatcher finally gave permission for departure, Flight 965 was delayed for more than an hour and a half. For the passengers, this only meant that they would arrive home a little later. This is an additional pressure for the crew, because there is still a difficult night approach to the Colombian airfield ahead. As the Boeing taxis onto the runway, its 2 Rolls-Royce RB211 turbofan engines gradually gain power. Acceleration pushes passengers into their seats, and the aircraft's headlights pick out the road markings from the darkness. A moment later, the heavy machine lifts off the concrete like a feather. Miami remains shining with lights below, and 3 hours of silence and waiting are ahead. At an altitude of 11,000 meters, the liner reaches cruising speed. Dispatchers record his passing through checkpoints. Everything is going smoothly. There is a calm, almost routine exchange of phrases between the pilots in the cockpit. But every pilot knows that flying to Colombia is not a walk. The Andes Mountains do not forgive mistakes, especially at night, when the peaks are hidden in clouds, and any wrong turn can be fatal. And here the first juxtaposition is born. Serenity reigns above, among the passengers. Someone has taken out a book, someone has fallen asleep, and someone is just dreaming of meeting their relatives. And in the cockpit, the pilots are already mentally preparing for the descent. The difficult terrain ahead requires precision to the second. They know this, but they don't yet know that very soon they will find themselves in a situation where neither experience nor modern technology will help. The clock on the dashboard shows the 21st hour of the evening. It's almost completely dark outside the cabin windows, except for the tiny lights of cities flickering somewhere below, and a thick layer of clouds stretches over the wings. There is a half-asleep silence in the cabin, broken only by the occasional ringing of the onboard kitchen and the hum of engines. For passengers, this is an ordinary flight, and many do not even realize that behind these clouds lies one of the most difficult regions to navigate in South America. The journey from Miami to Cali is short, just over 3 hours. The plane has already passed the traverse of Cartagena and contacted the control center in Bogota. Here, the crew must strictly follow the instructions. The route control system in Colombia is designed in such a way that every course change is coordinated with the ground. At 21:07, the pilots report passing the booth checkpoint. Everything is going smoothly. Then they get permission to descend. First up to 7,000 meters, then up to 6,000. Boeing smoothly changes the angle of flight, and new indicators light up in the cockpit. Navigation points are displayed on the electronic display of the onboard computer. Everything seems orderly and understandable. At this time, the co-pilot requests a weather report in Cali via the ACAR system. The answer is soothing. It is quiet, some clouds, visibility is more than 10 kilometers. Light rain is possible at times. The conditions are almost ideal for landing. Down below, everything is completely different. The mountains stretch for tens of kilometers, the peaks go above 3,000 meters, and the valleys form narrow corridors. Getting to Cali means going through this maze blindly, relying on instruments. The approach manager gets in touch. The voice in the headphones is calm. Cali 965, at the reception. Can you approach lane 1? Yes, but we need to start descending now, the commander replies. Permission has been granted, and the crew is preparing for the arrival pattern through the Rosso point, one of the key vector markers. And again, the contrast. Passengers at this time do not even notice that the plane is changing altitude. For them, it's a slight jolt, a slightly changed engine sound. Someone adjusts the blanket, someone continues to sleep. In the cockpit, concentrated work begins. The pilots check the maps, set up the autopilot, and discuss the procedure. All that for some is almost imperceptible nuances. For others, it is a series of solutions on which the accuracy of landing depends. At 21:36, dispatcher Nelson Rivera Ramirez suggests an option. Instead of entering from the south, try a more convenient approach to lane 19 from the north. The pilots agree because it shortens the route. But any change introduces an additional burden. You need to change settings, check coordinates, monitor altitude and speed. All this happens in a matter of minutes, and a mistake here is equal to a disaster. As the airliner glides smoothly through the clouds, the tension in the cabin grows. The plane is flying by instruments, and ahead are the black hulks of the Andes, which the pilots cannot see. Everything is decided by the numbers on the displays. The calmness of the passengers and the coherence of the crew still retain the illusion of control. But in this night sky, everything will become much more complicated than even the most experienced pilots expected. At 21:37, the plane had already descended and passed the Tula checkpoint. The usual route grid is still lit on the cabin screens, but this is where the subtle shift begins, which passengers would never have noticed, and the crew had not yet realized at that moment. The Boeing veers off course to the left and heads east for a minute. The commander contacts the dispatcher, Cali 965. Can we fly directly to Rosso and execute the arrival schedule from there? Permission has been granted. The pilots are beginning to prepare the navigation system for a new approach. The task seems simple. You need to specify the Rosso point in the computer and adjust the course. But it is at this point that the usual logic fails. On the maps, Rosso is designated as NDB, a point with the letter R. But in the list of the aircraft database, under the same abbreviation, R, there is another point, in the Bogota area, 215 kilometers from here. The onboard computer outputs a list of several matches. And here the human factor arises. The commander chooses the nearest option, believing that the system will prompt exactly the right Rosso. But the autopilot instantly corrects course, and the Boeing begins to turn east, to a point located in a completely different region. For passengers, everything is still quiet and peaceful. No one understands that the liner is already moving away from the correct route. In the cabin, the flight attendants are preparing for the upcoming boarding, collecting trays and reminding them about the straps. And a tense dialogue begins in the cockpit. The co-pilot is trying to figure out the approach pattern, the commander is checking the maps, but the picture does not add up. They know they should be near Rosso, but the instruments show a different direction. Another problem is added to this. The pilots activated the air brake to reduce speed and altitude faster. But this decision, which seemed logical at the time, would later play a fatal role. The situation looks paradoxical. On the one hand, the crew has everything: modern instruments, maps, and experience. On the other hand, there are a number of minor inconsistencies. A new approach pattern, a coincidence of point names, and a rush due to delays. These little things add up to chaos. On the ground, the dispatcher calmly clarifies, "Cali 965, what is your altitude and distance?" The pilots respond, but their lines increasingly betray confusion. They begin to suspect that something is wrong, but they don't understand exactly where the mistake is. There is a tense silence in the cabin, punctuated by short phrases and the rustle of cards. And beyond the portholes is a black wall. Passengers see only sparse lights below, but they have no idea that the plane is heading away from the valley. And ahead of it, there are mountains hidden in darkness and clouds. Phrases with a hint of doubt are increasingly being heard in the cockpit. The commander asks, "Where are we?" The co-pilot tries to check the map, but the route lines no longer match what the instruments show. The autopilot steers the airliner away, and the dispatcher, being hundreds of kilometers away, operates only with altitude and distance figures. The paradox of the situation is that the pilots have in their hands one of the most advanced navigation computers of that time. But the system relies on precise coordinates. If you give it the wrong point, it will lead you where you're told, even if it's in the opposite direction. The human brain waits for logic, and automation obeys commands. It was this collision that became a trap for Flight 965. There is a rush in the cabin. The commander asks the dispatcher to confirm the possibility of entering from the other side. He answers in the affirmative, but does not specify the specific coordinates. At this time, the crew is increasingly disoriented. They talk about the map and mention points, but they can't relate themselves to the actual terrain. In aviation, this is called situational disorientation, a condition when a pilot ceases to understand exactly where he is in space. And again, the contrast. In the cabin, passengers are confident that everything is going according to plan. Someone notices only a slight change in the angle of flight. The plane seems to have tilted a little more. Several people are adjusting bags under the chairs, the children are napping. The flight attendants are preparing for boarding instructions. Everything looks like a regular evening flight, but something completely different is happening in the sky. The Boeing is flying east, moving further away from the safe corridor in the valley. At an altitude of about 9,000 feet, this means one thing: mountains begin to rise ahead. But the pilots can't see them. The clouds are tightly covering the horizon. The only reference points are the numbers on the screens. The commander tries to rectify the situation, but each new attempt only adds to the confusion. You can hear on the air, "Cali 965, what is your deletion?" But there is no answer. The crew is engrossed in an internal struggle. They discuss schemes, try to introduce new points, but the understanding of the real situation has disappeared. At this moment, The sky over the Andes becomes an insidious maze. For passengers, it's still a quiet flight on the eve of Christmas. For pilots, these are moments in which the loop of mistakes, haste, and wrong decisions is compressed. The liner continues its descent. The altimeter readings are dropping faster than they should on a safe approach. Suddenly, the harsh metallic voice of the automatic system is heard in the cabin. Terrain, terrain, pull up, the ground ahead, up. This is the voice of GPWS, the Earth Proximity Warning System. The commander abruptly looks up from the maps and exclaims, "I see the Earth!" Below, through the gaps in the clouds, the dark silhouette of the slopes really appears. Next, the system emits an even more insistent signal, and with it, vibration on the steering wheel turns on, shaking, reminding the pilots. The plane is in danger. Hands reach for the pull levers. The Rolls-Royce engines roar as they enter takeoff mode. Boeing starts to lift its nose. But this is where the price of previous decisions comes in. The air brake is still released, and the speed for maneuvering is insufficient. The airliner seems to be struggling with an invisible wall. It is trying to gain height, but the weight of metal and air resistance do not allow it to soar sharply upward. In the cabin, passengers feel it as a sudden jolt and a sharp rise. Those who were still dozing wake up. Several people grab the armrest. No one understands what is happening, but the alarm is transmitted instinctively. A sharp climb at night is always a signal of an unusual situation. There is a cacophony of sound in the cockpit. GPWS repeats the warning. The steering wheel shakes. The commander shouts, "Up, up." The co-pilot fixes the parameters. All actions are performed correctly, but the seconds are running out too fast. Less than 20 seconds pass from the moment of the first signal to the climax. The nose of the aircraft is up, the engines are running at full speed, but the vertical speed is still low. The mountains loom, although they are not visible through the clouds. Boeing is fighting for every meter of altitude. It's a desperate race against geography and time. And here is the moment of truth. Just a few kilometers from Cali Airport, the liner meets the slopes of a mountain range. At an altitude of about 2,000 meters, it touches the ground. A blow, the roar of engines, a blinding flash of sparks, and the Andes night is torn apart by a roar that only a few residents of the surrounding villages hear. Downstairs, in the salon, the celebration, which was supposed to begin in an hour in the Colombia Valley, ends in 1 second. For most, it's darkness. For the mountains, it's just another echo, the sound of human error. An oppressive silence reigns over the slopes of the Andes. A huge plane that has just flown at an altitude of kilometers disappears in an instant, and all that remains is the night, the wind, and the occasional lights below. Residents of nearby villages hear the rumble, but do not understand what happened. Thunderstorms and rockfalls are a common occurrence here in the mountains. It was not until the morning of the next day, December 21st, that the first rescuers began to reach the crash site. It was not easy to find the plane. The area is cut off from civilization. Roads do not lead there. Dense forest and fog hide the wreckage. The first debris on the mountainside is spotted from a Colombian Air Force helicopter. Metal fragments scattered on the green carpet of trees look like white spots in the darkness. The operation lasts more than 13 hours. The wind breaks the cables, clouds block the view, and vehicles get stuck on the slopes. But it is precisely in such conditions that people do not retreat. Rescuers find those who manage to survive the impact. Of the 163 people on board, only 4 passengers remain alive. They are lifted on stretchers, given first aid right in the mountains, and evacuated by helicopters. And among the metal and debris, they discover another creature that has become a symbol of this tragedy. There was a dog of one of the passengers in the cargo hold of the plane. She miraculously survived without sustaining serious injuries. Rescuers gave her the name Milagra, which means miracle in Spanish. A Red Cross team took care of her for several days, and then she was sheltered by airline employees and taken to the United States. This moment creates a sharp contrast. On the one hand, there are mountains covered with smoke and debris. On the other, a living being who, despite everything, got out of this nightmare. For people working on the site, it has become a symbol of hope. a reminder that even in the darkest stories, there is always a spark of life. But for the investigators and specialists, there was a completely different task ahead: to understand how a modern aircraft with an experienced crew could get lost just a few minutes away from the airfield. Several organizations are taking over the investigation at once. The Colombian Civil Aviation Administrative Council works together with the American National Transportation Safety Board, the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, and representatives of Boeing and Rolls-Royce companies. Each side understands that this is not just about one flight, but also about the reputation of the entire international flight system. The first conclusions point to the human factor. The pilots decided to change the route and introduce a new approach pattern. To do this, they had to re-register the route points in the onboard computer. But it was at this moment that everything went wrong. On the map, Rosso, the key point of entry, was marked with the letter R. In the system, another navigation marker was hidden under the same letter near Bogota, hundreds of kilometers away. The autopilot faithfully executed the command, but sent the plane not where the crew expected. Another factor is added to this. At the moment when the pilots were trying to figure out the maps, they released the air brake to reduce speed and altitude faster. On the display screens, everything looked logical, a reduction to the approach pattern. But because of the wrong point, the airliner had already flown over the right landmark and started heading towards the mountains. When the mistake became obvious, there was too little time left. 12 seconds before the collision, the GPWS system warned of the danger. The pilots increased thrust, lifted the nose, and began to climb. But the brake, which remained released, took precious kilometers per hour from the plane. The climb turned out to be too slow, and the airliner could not fly over the ridge. Technical experts later made a calculation. If the air brake had been turned off immediately after the GPWS was triggered, the crew would have had a chance to fly over the mountain. But in reality, this chain of decisions has developed differently. The investigation report, published almost a year later, stated in dry language, "The cause of the disaster was numerous crew errors in the management of onboard systems and approach planning." But behind this dry language, there was a much more complicated picture. Fatigue, flight delays, human haste, and onboard computer interface features have turned a standard overnight flight into a trap. The contrast is obvious here. Technologies created for safety have played against humans, and mistakes that could have been corrected at other times have become fatal in the conditions of mountainous terrain and night. The experts who simulated the last minutes of Flight 965 scrolled through the data recorders over and over again. The picture looked painfully simple and at the same time unbearably tragic. The plane could have been saved. When the GPWS system first triggered, there were just over 10 seconds left before the collision. It's not much, but in aviation, even 1 second can solve everything. If the crew had removed the air brake immediately after the signal, the Boeing would have received additional acceleration and would have been able to gain critical speed for a vigorous exit from the dive. Then the climb curve would cross the mountain line, and the airliner would slip over the ridge, remaining in the air. In the simulations, it looked almost ridiculously simple. The test pilots, who knew the scenario in advance, removed the brake, and the car, as if freed from excess cargo, stretched the trajectory upward. Only a few dozen meters decided the outcome. A few dozen meters, which was not enough for a real flight. This creates an almost philosophical contrast. On the one hand, there are millions of dollars, modern systems, and an experienced crew. On the other hand, there is a chain of momentary decisions. A delay, an incorrectly chosen point, a rush, a forgotten brake. All this is woven into a story where the fate of 163 people was decided in an interval shorter than the pause between sighs. That is why the final report of the investigation did not just state the errors. It became a warning. Aviation companies have revised navigation point designation schemes, strengthened pilot training in case of disorientation, and the GPWS system in new generations of aircraft has received algorithms that automatically turn off the brake when an alarm is triggered. The tragedy has shown that even the most reliable cars depend on small, almost imperceptible details. And when these details are put together in the wrong sequence, the result can no longer be changed, no matter how much technology is behind the crew. The pre-Christmas night in Cali was supposed to be filled with lights, meetings, and the joy of returning home. But the flight that families and friends were waiting for never entered the valley. That evening, along with the Boeing 757, the illusion that technology and experience could eliminate mistakes disappeared. This disaster was a turning point. Aviation has learned tough lessons from it. The names of navigation points have been unified so that there is no more confusion with the same designations. Databases have been updated, and pilot training has been enhanced in case of loss of spatial orientation. In the new models, the onboard systems have become smarter. They automatically prevent a situation that then became fatal. But no amount of technology can remove the main thing, the human factor. On every flight, in every cabin, the same balance remains between attention and fatigue, between precision and haste. Where passengers see only a quiet flight and the promise of a holiday, pilots fly the plane through an invisible corridor every time, where the price of error is measured in seconds. The story of Flight 965 reminds us that aviation is safe not because it excludes tragedies, but because it learns from each of them. For every new instruction, for every additional button or warning, there is someone's fate, someone's failed holiday. And when you take to the sky again, looking out the window at the twinkling lights below, it's worth remembering that this apparent ease hides the hard work of thousands of people and decades of experience gained at a high price. Not all flights become history, but each one carries the lessons of the past. Flight 965 did not return home, but its dark night has become a source of light for aviation, which now shows the way to others.